Welcome back, writers. Today we're going to look at 5 things that your villain needs. Before we start, I think we should define what a villain is. Villains are characters in stories who make up an important evil exerting of power within the plot. Villains are always antagonists, but it's important to remember that not all antagonists are villains. Yes, the villain opposes the protagonist and creates conflict, just like an antagonist. But a villain is inherently evil with malicious intentions, and they're often driven by selfish or destructive goals. For example, Boromir in Lord of the Rings is an antagonist, opposing Frodo's mission, but he's not a villain. The Joker in Batman, though, is. He's inherently evil, enjoys chaos, and seeks destruction. The difference lies in morality and the intent of the character. Today we're looking at villains specifically and dialing into what they need in order to work. If your villain doesn't have the upper hand on your protagonist, isn't superior in some manner, then they're not a genuine threat. And if they're not a threat, you need to look at their value for the story, because they can't cause the required conflict that you need. So you've got to make them superior. This can be physically, mentally, financially, or even in terms of their status, being a boss or the head of a company. It's whatever you feel will give them an edge that allows them to make the protagonist's life and march towards their goals harder. With a villain who has the upper hand, your story has a threat readers can fear. This in turn adds to the tension, which is vital for stories. And in that place of tension, readers get to see how your protagonist moves forward and ultimately who they are. When a villain doesn't have a goal behind their actions, they can feel flat and one-dimensional. And when that happens, they lose their potency. In shorter stories, it's not as noticeable. But in a 100k novel, there has to be something more to make them feel real. And it's not enough just to label them bad and make them do bad things. Take Scar from Lion King. His goal is to be king. That's his drive. It just so happens that his goal can't be achieved with Mufasa or Simba around. Imagine if he had no goal, he just acted without purpose. How would audiences respond to that? They may believe he lost his mind, lost the plot, which is fair, but that would create a different character and a different story. So with your villain, give them goals. Understand why they do what they do. You may not even need to reveal what that goal is, but as the writer, you need to know it because it colors the villain's behavior. Then once you have a villain with goals, they'll be easier to write because you know what they yearn for. They'll be more believable on the page because they won't feel flat, and the conflict will be clearer to the reader as they'll understand how the villain's goals impact the protagonist's goals. If you have your villain losing, it diminishes their threat, it pierces that aura. Great villains from Anton to Dracula win and win, each time raising the stakes and challenge for the protagonist. When a villain is seen to be defeated, readers question their position. Villains should be seen as unbeatable, so superior to the protag that it's going to take something special to overcome them. So have them win over and over, gaining more of an upper hand over the protag. They can be slowed or sidestepped, which isn't the same as them losing. But even in those moments, think about sacrifice for the protagonist. For example, Luke and Co getting off the Death Star and saving Leia. They sidestepped Vader, but it came at the cost of losing Obi-Wan. And when you have your villain winning, ensure that these wins have an impact on the protagonist. Don't let the wins be untethered. Once you have your villain winning, readers become clear of the challenge and how it is mounting. They feel that the villain could genuinely win, and they need to believe that so that they read on. The protagonist's victory can't be predictable. And with the villain winning, when they finally lose, the victory will feel earned, which is important for the resolution of your story. If your villain is important to the story, their threat needs to be introduced early. When a villain's threat appears later, it creates confusion. Readers wonder about the villain's place in the story. The villain becomes an afterthought, rather than a prominent figure. To stop this, introduce the villain within Act 1. This doesn't need to be a physical introduction either. It can purely be the villain's threat. In The Final Empire by Brandon Sanderson, we don't see the Lord Emperor early, but his threat is evident early by how he rules and kills and treats his people. Having the villain's presence early in the story is great orientation, letting readers put a name to the person, group, or thing that needs to be overcome. It also shows readers that the villain is important to the story and important to the protagonist's journey. Again, I've got to say, it doesn't need to be the villain physically. It can just be their threat. When readers don't know the threat of the villain, it can lead to confusion and questions about the purpose of the villain. The best villains carry a clear threat. Darth Vader, Nosferatu. Audiences aren't unsure. Now, if uncertainty is what you're going for, that's fine. It's a conscious decision. But if not, think about that threat. So what you can do for that clarity is an event where the villain's threat is displayed early Scar killing Mufasa, for example. Or you can show it through how others fear your villain or treat them. I think of how Trinity runs from Agent Smith at the start of The Matrix. We see that she's powerful in the face of armed police, but when she's confronted with the agents, she runs, showing their threat. The threat you show doesn't have to be huge. It can be a hint, but it needs to land. It needs to say to readers, this is the villain. This is what the protagonist is up against. With a clear threat established, readers can focus on the plot, on the story, and start following with confidence the plot's direction. They understand an important aspect of the villain. He or she is a threat and will be an obstacle in this story. Okay, that's been 5 things your villain needs. Drop any questions you have in the comments. Did I miss anything? What are your 5 needs of a villain? See you in the next video.